Welcome, everybody, to the Ultimate Advisors Resource Podcast. Today, I've got a special guest, Tracey Ullom, here from John Hancock, Associate Counsel, Advanced Markets. Thanks for coming, Tracey.
Thanks for having me here, Jordan.
You're welcome. So, today, we're going to talk a little bit about a tax update, which I'm pretty excited about. There's a lot happening. We're going to talk a little bit about what strategies we're seeing, or more specifically, you're seeing. We're going to talk about some business owner stuff, some estate planning stuff, and kind of all around, I guess, and get a couple topics in.
Yeah, we're going to cover a lot.
I think so as well. So I'm pretty excited. Before we get started, I'm Jordan Pence. Advisors Resource Company is a BGA. We help advisors like you and agents like you write more life insurance. And let's, I guess, get right into it. So, talking about today's tax environment, financial environment, what questions are you getting from advisors? Like, why are they calling into you? What are they asking you about? Like, what's the big thing that people are talking about?
Yeah, so as part of Advanced Markets, the calls that we get kind of run a wide range of different topics. But at the high level, the majority of the topics that we're discussing are really those day-to-day basics, generally estate planning, business planning, and that business planning usually includes both business succession planning as well as employee benefits planning.
Right.
So I think that probably is pretty vague. It doesn't give a lot of like detailed answer on what we're really seeing. So we can kind of drill down a little bit. But there's been some recent pending changes. So to those areas specifically at a high level.
Yes.
So that's really why those areas are generating larger call volumes specifically.
Yeah, especially like last year before the election, a lot of people were talking about estate taxes, and so that was extremely popular. But I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the tax environment and so forth, but you mentioned business succession planning and executive benefit planning. So what are you seeing there, and why do you think?
Yeah, so I think so when we talk about, what we're seeing in the business world, we kind of saw this shift at the beginning of the year because there was so much uncertainty in the estate planning world.
Right.
But for business owners, especially, we saw a really big Supreme Court decision come down in June of 2024 called Connolly v. US.
It
So
wasn't that long ago either, and people have like already forgot about it. Like it seems like there was a big like market trend of every insurance company talking about it, and now it's like it's only a year later, and that was a big deal.
yeah, someone says it's the Connolly versary. So, we've had the first year anniversary of the Connolly case. So everything kind of disrupted in the market when it came to buy sell planning, especially the entity purchase type planning.
Yes.
So we are still talking a lot about it in the market. We as an industry came out really strong and we talked about it really broadly. We got deep into the weeds and we were talking to everybody, but that's our industry is still very small. So expanding that out to CPAs, to business owners specifically, attorneys, they may not necessarily know how big of an impact or that the Connolly case even happened. So
That's
what
a
we're
good point.
really talking about is, using the Connolly case, whether it applies to certain business owners, other business owners, but using it really as kind of a foot in the door or just that conversation starter as calling your business owner clients and saying, there was a big change to buy sell planning. Let's take another look at your buy sell. Do you have a buy sell? And starting the conversation really in that review process. Connolly didn't change whether or not we should be doing buy sell reviews.
Right.
It really just gave us a trigger to start doing, to kind of go back to the drawing board and do them again.
Yeah, I can not remember a time that an advisor started to talk about a business with partners and they actually had like a well-funded buy-sell agreement. So the the fact that Conley has come up and it's the Conley-versary, as you put it, I think gives everybody a good excuse to talk to clients. But I think something that you said also is talking to the attorneys and the CPAs.
Hmm.
They're probably not even aware of this, and we've sort of done the flurry of hey, visit with your clients and kind of put it in the back on the back burner or whatever.
Yeah, and when we just talk about reviews in general, it's it's typically recommended that a buy sell review happens every couple of years. So there's a lot of changes that happen for businesses and business owners, whether it's different people coming into the business, leaving the business. The goals of the business will change, valuation will
That's
change,
what I was going to say.
funding is going to change. It's just taking a look to see, does the buy sell that they have in place, if they have it in place, if they don't,
Which they probably don't.
get one. But is the one that they have in place still meeting the needs and the goals of the business today as it was a couple years ago? And building on that is the funding mechanism that they need in place, or is there an opportunity there?
And I guess to bottom line it, and I don't want to talk
No.
about Conley the whole time, but Conley basically, and I'm not asking for a recommendation or anything, but it put into light the challenges that an entity purchase can have in the eyes of the government, correct? In
That's
the eyes of
correct.
the IRS.
Yeah, it really had to do with the valuation of the business, or based on an entity purchase agreement holding life insurance, for estate tax purposes. So it can get really, the analysis can get very weedy, and can get very technical. So we're really just or letting folks know that it's a good time to open the door, start the conversation. Buy sell planning is very holistic. So looking at all the
Right.
facts and circumstances and seeing if there's an opportunity there, whether or not there's a Connolly problem or just a general business succession issue.
Yeah, really you should use it as a foot in the door rather than like hey, this big thing happened, and it's more like, are you aware of this? Let's talk about your buy sell agreement.
But
Make sure it's the right one. So you mentioned executive planning as well. What do you guys see in there, and what do you think the reason is for that?
yeah, again, I started saying, the reason why we're talking about certain things is because there's been changes, whether it's changes in the law, changes in the market, the environment, just what we're seeing. And the executive benefit planning topic, there's been some spur there. We saw, really, it's coming out of the COVID pandemic. We're
Right.
still, kind of recovering there, and we're seeing some holdover things. So during the pandemic, we saw this, the Great Resignation is what it was called, where people were
Right.
switching jobs and moving, and there was this flurry of employees kind of shifting around. We saw, and they were leaving whether for new opportunities or exiting the labor force entirely. So while we're seeing that kind of settle down, so the Great Resignation we think is over, what it did was it gave employers this insight into how valuable key employees actually are, and what the cost of potentially losing them can be to not only the business, but their bottom line and the revenue source. So taking another look at what employers are offering to those key executives, the key employees, and are there benefits in the marketplace or things that they can do that might just be a little bit different than the competition, to kind of keep them engaged and keep them employed there, long term.
Yeah, so like rather than paying bonuses or something like that, let's think about some other ways to reward and attract really good employees. That doesn't really sound like anything that's um, unusual than a typical life agent or financial professional is talking about. It's just really kind of reminding and doing, like the right things over and over again, right?
Yeah, and when we see the executive benefit planning, it's really what we call, like, kind of on this continuum of planning. So we start to talk about what is the what reward are they looking to give? What kind of, is there a vesting schedule associated to it? What kind of control or repayment does the employer want? So there's a lot of different opportunities in that space. So again, it's just starting the conversation. Is do you have a few folks in your business that would cost the business if you lost them? And is there a way that we can structure something for those employees that's more than just the table stakes benefits offering? So we think about a lot of benefits that are offered in the marketplace,
401k,
401ks,
yeah.
403bs, those qualified plans, health benefits, vacation, those types of things. Those are table stakes. And especially as you start to get up into the executive level, it's looking for those other opportunities that we have available through an executive benefit plan, whether that's a bonus arrangement or some kind of deferred compensation plan. We can structure those. There's a lot of different options to meet the needs of both the employee as well as the employer and their bottom line.
Yeah, and it's especially important, I think, for smaller business owners, which are most of our clients, right? We're not dealing with 500 employee businesses. It's mostly small businesses, and they could lose one or two employees, and it could be really devastating.
Hmm.
So you brought up the tax reform, and it's been in the news for a while. We had in 2024, everybody was talking about the estate exemption going down, and then the election happened, and everybody's like, "Don't need to worry about that anymore." So there's some stuff going on.
Yes.
What do you think's going to happen, or what is like on the table? What's the projection? Where are we going to be in the next, I don't know, 6 months?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of just step back a minute and kind of talk about just estate planning in general, and then we can get into kind of the nuances of the tax bill. Because again, it's the 26th of June
Right.
today. By the time folks watch this, if they're not watching it live, things may have changed.
That's actually a really good point because I was reviewing some of this stuff, and well, I don't want to get ahead of us, but
Yeah.
a lot could change, and there's not exactly 100% consistent or agreement on every. Yeah, it's one of those words, right?
Yeah. So what we do know is that the current bill, both the one that came out of that was passed by the House, as well as what we're seeing from the current Senate version. Again, we're seeing changes to that happening real time. There was some this morning. Parliamentarian kind of came in with some stuff. But what we do know is that we are seeing a large number of estate planning cases still ongoing, even though the estate tax exemption is set to remain relatively high at 15 million is what it's currently written into the bill. So the question was, if we have this high estate tax exemption, do people still need to do the planning? And I think there's a really good opportunity for agents, financial professionals to really engage with clients, whether they're facing an estate tax problem. And many of our ultra high net worth clients are will still face that problem.
Yeah, it almost doesn't matter what happens if you're worth
Exactly.
100 million.
That's still going to be a concern. But what we're also talking about and trying to really engage with consumers and really drive a little bit more just awareness are the non-tax reasons to do estate planning. So the benefits of having life insurance for liquidity, for things like estate equalization, that general creditor protection that you receive in many states through life insurance.
Texas, we have pretty good benefits.
Exactly. So no matter what comes out of Washington and the legislature this year, there's going to be a lot of reasons to engage with clients outside of just tax planning on the benefits of estate planning, the benefits of understanding legacy, liquidity, life insurance in general, and the opportunities there.
I tend to agree with you as well, and I think that's a big mistake that many financial professionals and agents do is they think estate planning's only for my clients that are worth at least, well, currently, and we can talk about the permanent changes, but currently, 15 million times two if you're married, right? And so maybe you can go a little bit more into detail on the non tax reasons that people should consider it
Yeah.
and what they should be kind of thinking about with that. And then maybe we can go a little bit back to what is for sure. I don't know if everything's changed completely, but what is in, because they've got the BBB,
Yeah.
the big beautiful bill.
One big beautiful bill.
Yeah, there you go.
Is the moniker.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what's in it? What's not in it? What are we expecting? Again, if you watch the news cycle, every 10 minutes, the story might change a little bit. So, again, everything that we say today may or may not be relevant.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, it almost doesn't matter, does it?
But generally, what we know, what we think is going to happen, there's a deadline set. President Trump has said he wants us, by July 4th. The Senate and the House are set to go on recess. That's not going to happen until they get the tax bill done. There's still moving pieces. There's still negotiation happening. There's slim margins on both sides. So they have to negotiate. That even within the party, they kind of have to find those common ground areas. We don't necessarily expect it to be done by July 4th. Again,
Yeah, that seems
so Paul, and I've been wrong before.
it seems pretty ambitious, July 4th.
That's next Friday.
Yeah, that's less than 7 days. Well, no, 8 days from
Yeah.
now, but still. Yeah, that seems a bit ambitious.
We
Eh,
do know that they will pass something we expect them to pass something by mid-July. By the end of July, we run into the issue with the debt ceiling expiring, or kind of running up against the debt ceiling again, which they'll have to deal with. So they need to get this done before then. Additionally, if it continues to go longer, we might end up losing the ability to do reconciliation entirely. So so there is a driver here from a time frame perspective that we're going to see something. It's going to continue to move. It's just going to be moving very quickly. So we're going to continue to see a lot of these changes until we get to the final result.
Yeah, I can imagine so. And there's a lot of there's pretty narrow majority in both the Senate and the House. So I think that represents a bit of a challenge, right?
Yeah, we have to kind of appease all, we have to appease all of the GOP essentially,
Right.
or the Republican side, in order to get this passed under a simple majority.
Yeah, from the most farthest conservative to the most centric, or whatever you would want to say, right?
Exactly. So there's a few things that we don't know what the final legislation is going to say. We have a good understanding of some of the key areas. So the first one we talked about is the lifetime exemption, that
Right.
estate tax. So that hasn't changed between either of the bills. It's sitting at $15 million, again, adjusted for inflation beyond 2026. So that we think is probably pretty stable. The other priority that the Senate and the House had was to make as many of these provisions from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or TCJA, permanent. So we do see that in the estate tax legislation. So there's no sunset date. It is currently written as a permanent provision. Now, what permanency means in tax law is yet to be seen, because that changes, by until the next tax law change, essentially. And we've
Right.
seen significant tax law changes, during almost every administration. So it's yet, I mean, whether or not, how long that stays permanent, we'll see. But there is no scheduled sunset date like we had with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which is nice.
That is nice. I mean, especially if you're trying to be a planner,
Yeah.
like if you're trying to make plans.
Yeah, we're not going to be out there saying it's going to go away, it's going to go away, not knowing, that flexibility. So a couple of things that we know, the income tax provisions, the 37% top income tax bracket is set to stay the same. The extension just of those individual provisions, the standard deduction set.
The standard deduction is going to stay the way it is, because it's very high.
Yes, it's currently extended to stay the same. Again, it's written in permanent. So that's a really nice feature as well.
Yeah, that was one of the big things that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act did.
Yeah.
Not to mention 199A, but we can talk about that a little
A
bit.
lot of detail, but I just want to note that was another
Yeah.
sticking point for both of this for Congress as well. So 198A extension permanency is written in. What the percentage is going to be right now, we have a 20%. The House bill did put that at 23%, so it did increase it a little bit. The Senate version came back down to 20, so we don't really know where that's going to land. I think the biggest
That's really not that big of a difference.
but it can be for large businesses that
Well,
are
yeah, that's a
at the
good
QBI
point.
deduction.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So when you go from 20 to 23, when you start to look at the numbers, and the whole goal right now is making the balance, and
Right.
this calculation,
Right.
that number can make a difference for that calculation.
Well, I guess what I meant was the 3% doesn't seem like a huge difference, but I mean, the 199A is great for small businesses. That was like one of the best things that came out of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Not to mention the 21% C Corp tax, but we don't have to get into that. I mean, again, we don't have to talk all tax, I guess. But no, I think that's great. You were gonna, yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you, so please continue.
So I just want to kind of hit the one last thing that I think is what may end up holding up the bill a little bit longer, is the SALT cap.
The SALT, of course.
SALT. So we saw with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017 that the state and local tax provision that allowed a deduction of state and local tax was capped at $10,000. That was not adjusted for inflation. That was just a $10,000 cap. So for many states that have high state and local tax, that really created a higher tax bracket rate for them on that. So
yeah, they really cried about that when that was, or they complained about it when that came out. It is a big deal. It is a really big deal.
So what we're seeing now is, okay, we go back to those margins. So we have quite a few what we'll call blue state uh House Republican or
Yeah,
Republicans, as well as, and so they've said that for their constituents, that SALT cap is a major priority for them. So when the bill came out of the House, we saw that SALT cap set at $40,000, up from the 10. Now we're seeing that kind of the Senate didn't pick that up as much, but we don't have a lot of senators from blue states that would hold up that provision.
that's a good point.
The problem is what we're hearing, or kind of what the conversation is that once it goes back to the House, that could be a problem to get the House majority that they need on board if we don't have that negotiation in the SALT. So that's one of the things that we're watching clearly, as far as getting that negotiation to get everyone on board to pass.
Yeah, that's a really tough one because it's almost like well, we don't have to get political, but it's like a subsidy for the states that have higher taxes, almost having a higher state and local
I
tax.
can't comment.
Yeah, never mind, forget about it. Let's move on. Um, we can move on from there. No, I think there's a lot going on, but
Yeah.
it sounds like we're getting. I thought we were maybe getting a little closer than that, but there seems to be a little distance, and I think July 4th was probably pretty optimistic.
I think we are getting closer, though. I think we are expected to see another Senate version this week.
Oh,
So I
okay.
understand that it's Thursday.
Well, it is Thursday, so tomorrow.
And again, I haven't checked the news cycle in a few minutes, so it could have
Yeah,
it could have.
it could have happened. It could have
I
happened.
did see that overnight yesterday into today, there was some more movement from the Senate parliamentarian that kind of goes through and does what they call the bird bath in order to make sure everything meets reconciliation rules. So that's still ongoing. Once we kind of get through that, then the Senate will pick up some of those pieces again, and hopefully hopefully have another draft at least this week. But they are working very hard. I would expect that they're going to work into late hours, potentially for the weekend, to try to get this done.
Yeah, that's makes it challenging for all of us. I mean, what should like advise financial professionals, agents,
Yeah.
and their clients think about, or how should they plan for this? Because so much changes, and yeah, permanent is permanent till the next guy gets
Yeah.
in, right? So yeah, what should they do?
Yeah, right now we're really talking about some of the same things we were talking about in 2017, 2018.
Right.
Those, the benefit of engaging with a financial partner, creating a flexible financial plan, whether it's flexible for on an individual perspective, flexible on an estate perspective, making sure that, in times that we're in right now with those high lifetime exemptions, relatively low income tax rates, we take advantage of it. We
You
don't know where
should.
those are going to go in the future.
Yeah, you never know. Now, I pulled up a graph for an agent one time, and we looked at, okay, what's the historical lifetime exemption? And it's never really gone down. I
Yeah.
don't know if you've ever looked at that, but it's always been, it was like 100,000 at
Yeah.
one point, or it was very low, and then it went way up, and now it hasn't really ever gone back down. Now, that's not saying it couldn't go down.
Again, it doesn't mean it can't. I mean, in 2010, we saw it go away completely,
That's
but then you
true.
had capital gains that came in. So we didn't get the step up in basis. So there's a lot of things that
Oh, yeah,
we
that's
can
a good
do,
point.
and things that can change. We really have to take advantage of what's available today, understanding that you build the more runway we have for planning, the more flexibility we have.
Yeah.
So we don't want to get caught in a situation, and that was one of the hard parts coming into this year, is we were not sure what was going to happen with tax reform. We were concerned that we were going to run up against these deadlines
Yep.
and just not have the opportunity to add some of these flexible options, funding availability, even just getting in with attorneys and CPAs to do
That's been
these
one of those
things.
things. Yeah.
We were worried and trying to kind of raise those alarm bells that we had to start planning now. Now that that may not necessarily be the case, and we have more of a runway for planning, and now's the time to really start that opportunity, whether or not it's legal or regulatory changes that we're looking at being flexible for in the future. Our clients' own personal needs, their business
Yeah.
needs, the goals, things that they need in the future, those are all going to change as well. So knowing,
That's a good point. Even their family situation could change.
yeah, so the more the sooner we start the planning, the more flexibility we can add into the plan.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like waiting till the last minute is not a good strategy, and when you're thinking about estate planning, I think a lot of people out there are dealing with, especially nowadays, it seems like you've got very high net worth younger folks. And you mentioned flexibility already, but how do you get somebody like that to do anything? You know what I mean? And that's, I think, an extreme challenge because like an even under 50-year-old, like they're not really thinking about estate planning, and they might be worth 20, 30 million, and that's going to grow well beyond what inflation does. So what do you do for somebody like that?
Yeah. So I'll do my best to give some answers. I don't want to do what we always call the attorney answers. It depends. Uh,
It
so
does depend, doesn't it?
so it requires so every client's different, and I'll just put that out there. And in
Yes.
everybody knows that's not a epiphany answer to you, is that every
No.
client is different.
Oh,
But it requires a lot of fact finding, and in order to really assist in getting underneath what are the needs of the client, what is the client trying to do, what are the goals, what assets are we working with, what are the potential opportunities. Every client's going to look very different. Any planning that done is going to be very individualized, personal, based on those facts and circumstances. So there's often, trusts that are involved. We're talking about valuation of assets, which assets have an emotional attachment for the client versus
yeah.
other assets. Are we working with business assets? What's the control aspect they need to keep?
Yeah.
So we really kind of talk to folks about, what does the team look like? So you have your financial professionals, the people that work through your firm, who are they working with along the side, the clients? Who are the CPAs? Who are the attorneys? They're going to be looking at trusts and drafting. We can come up with the best plan, but if we don't have the right people in place to execute, that makes it pretty difficult.
That's a really good point. And furthermore, it's just so hard to get them to see, like, okay, well, I need to do something, but getting all the professionals in the room, I think, helps, because then you've got, if it's a CPA, attorney, financial professional, you've got all these people on the same side of the table saying, hey, we need to think about this. And that's a really good point. And I think that's really important for those folks that are
Yeah.
in those situations. So when you're building a case or building a strategy for a client, what's like, what is the process that they go
Yeah.
through?
So
You kind of alluded to it in what we just asked.
those planning opportunities, the actual planning, um, what we end up doing may not always seem like where we were headed from the outset. So
Right.
getting into really digging into to what the client is facing, what that client looks like. So we often see, so you said, younger clients, ultra high net worth. So let's say we have a couple that's 45 years old. We have two couples, both 45 years old, both worth, let's say, $20 million. At a high level, they really look similar
Yeah,
facts.
very similar.
But as we start to drill down into the facts and the finer details, including, the type of assets that they own, one may have a business asset, one may be more, real estate focused, liquid focused,
Good
they
point.
might be a little bit different. Do they have kids? Are they
Yeah,
taking care of aging parents? What's the focus? Where are they at? What do they need? Are they charitably inclined is always a question. We might have great opportunities there, but it depends on, the client and what's driving them for that planning need in order to decide kind of which direction we go. Um,
that's a really good point. Yeah, because if I own a bunch of real estate that's illiquid,
Mhm.
well, I definitely need, well, I guess a business too could be really illiquid. So, I mean, unless you're holding just straight up cash and 20 million, it's you're probably going to have a liquidity problem, I guess.
And that's where the life insurance
That's
comes in, right?
exactly. I kind of teed that one up for you, I guess.
Yeah. So there's a couple ways that for those types of clients that we're adding flexibility today.
Okay.
So from an estate planning perspective, we talk about, the building blocks of flexibility when we're talking about building flexible estate plans. At a high level, we can talk, it's, the four building blocks that I usually talk about is, trust provisions. We talk about, the type of policy or policy provisions and structure that can add a little bit of flexibility. Ownership structures, where does the insurance sit? What's the need? What's the ultimate goal? How do we transfer those things down the road potentially? And then looking at funding vehicles or funding techniques. How do
That's
we
a good
pay for
point.
the insurance? And
Yeah.
that adds flexibility to the plan as well. So those are the kind of building blocks that we talk about. And depending um, on the client and what's there, we might do a couple of the blocks together to kind of add the right flexibility. So they're not one size fits all. We can kind of layer these in as well.
Yeah, that's interesting because the funding mechanism could even be an asset that they have, or they could transfer a specific income generating property or something like that, which is a really good point because there's a lot of moving parts. But trust provisions, I probably shouldn't have been. We've talked a lot about slats. I've heard a lot about slats. Um, I probably know enough to be dangerous, but probably not as much as you. But I've heard a lot about slats. So is that what you're talking about when you're talking about a trust provision? Is that what all these acronyms really mean? Is like a provision of the trust?
That's right. So at its core, we're typically talking about what are refer in the irrevocable trust planning. We're
Right.
talking about what is sometimes referred in the market as intentionally defective grantor trusts or just grantor trusts. That's really that umbrella trust concept, or these irrevocable trusts are typically grantor trusts or defective grantor trusts. Then we start to kind of add in different provisions. And as we add in different provisions, we can make that grantor trust an islet for insurance purposes. We can make it a slat for spousal lifetime access provisions.
Right.
We can add, grantor provisions that we can add that add flexibility are like a swap provision or loan provisions, things like that. So all these different pieces kind of get added into those trusts. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's one type of trust or another. They're just provisions that we add to that grantor trust umbrella.
I am glad you brought this up because I've never really thought about it that deeply and never, I know what a slat is. I know what an islet is. I know what some of these other trusts are, but I guess people always think of those as different
Mm.
material things, and really it's just the same
It's
type
the
of
language that you're
thing, but yeah, but a different way of, yeah, the different provision.
Yeah. So let's say we have a grantor trust, and the grantor trust is drafted as an islet. So it's drafted in a way that allows for insurance provision. So in those cases, we're typically looking to avoid what we would call incidents of ownership in the
Right.
technical legal space. But really, it's just keeping the insurance outside of the estate of that person who's the grantor. Now we can also add in what we'd call SLAT provisions, so spousal lifetime access trust provisions. And what those provisions do is it makes the spouse essentially a beneficiary during their lifetime, so that if gifts are made to the trust and assets are put into the trust irrevocably, the spouse, still subject to certain provisions and discretion in the trust, still may have access to those trust assets for things like health, education, maintenance, or support.
Hymns.
The HEMS standard, or ascertainable standard in some language, is or terms is used. So that essentially gives them, potential access to those trust assets should they need them, but still keeps it out of the spouse's estate. So it's a great opportunity for flexibility. We know we're going to make these large gifts, but we're concerned, what if my spouse still needs access, or we need to have access to cash values
Yeah.
if we're doing it as an islet.
Right.
So that's really one of the really great opportunities to add flexibility to trust planning that we're seeing a lot of in the market.
That seems like the perfect solution for, like, those younger client, you know what I mean? That's like, I don't know why if you're a reasonable net worth, you wouldn't do something like that, but again, it all depends on their situation, obviously.
Yeah, it depends on their situation. And so, one of the things that I'll say about, for some of our clients, let's go back to with 45-year-olds with $20 million. They don't have, individually, they might have an estate tax problem if we're at 15 million, but combined as a couple, they don't, because there'd
Right.
be 30
Yeah.
million dollars
Yeah,
as a
that's a good point,
unit,
yeah.
combined. So what do we look at there? And they may not necessarily be at a level to do irrevocable trust planning, but there's still an opportunity for them, or they still may recognize or understand the need for liquidity and adding life insurance as part of their overall plan.
Right.
So there's other kind of ways that we can look at estate planning for them with the flexibility and the opportunity to maybe do trust planning down the road, or to do different types of planning with that policy as life continues and as life changes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, even if you're just, well, it just seems like the SLAT is a perfect tool for insurance owned for the benefit of your spouse and then potentially
Yeah.
your kids. I mean, that seems pretty obvious, or it seems like an obvious opportunity, certainly. So I've heard of the survivor standby trust, and I'm assuming that's a provision in a trust, or is this something is something materially different?
This is something materially different. So
Okay.
we're going to separate. So we
Okay.
just talked about irrevocable trust planning.
All
We're
right.
going to shift into different types of. So there's different. So we're going to shift into a different type of trust plan.
Okay.
So
So this is totally different.
yes. So we're going to talk about revocable trusts or trusts that are typically
Like a living
like
trust.
a living trust, testamentary trust. In
Okay.
this case, it's going to be referred to as a credit shelter trust.
Okay.
And what that means that is at the death of an individual, they'd have a credit shelter trust where whatever remaining lifetime exemption that they had, they'd use that up in that credit shelter trust.
Okay.
And then anything else would transfer to the spouse through the unlimited marital deduction.
Okay.
So
So today, oh, sorry, keep going.
yeah, so by using their exemption, we're actually we're using the exemption so those assets are part of their estate. So because those assets are part of their estate and now they're in a trust, they're outside of the estate of this spouse.
Got it. So
So
you could use like a second to die in that scenario
and
is
that's
the idea.
yeah, so that's typically what we're talking about. So we call it the survivor standby trust is the name of the concept or kind of what it's
That's a good
referring
idea
to as.
too, actually.
So this is really good for those clients who might be hesitant to make large irrevocable gifts, or they a lot of times we see it in cases where the insurance is ready to get issued, but maybe the trust isn't drafted yet,
Oh
or
yeah,
it's
that's a
just
good
not ready, or we're still working on the estate plan.
right.
So this might be a really great option. Again, we talk about, life insurance, the underwriting is never better than it is today.
Yeah.
So getting the insurance enforced, getting that completed, and then allowing the planning to continue and the actual drafting and any trusts can still continue, but we've at least locked in that insurability and the life insurance aspect.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I would assume, I guess you can't necessarily go into product details, but generally you're going to see like a second to die in that scenario.
Yeah. So how we really set this up? So we'll have typically the older, most likely to die first.
The man, the man's going to die first. So,
Theoretically.
yeah, generally.
So using that example, we'll say that the husband purchases a second to die or survivorship policy. They would personally own that policy
Okay.
and use personal funds to pay for the premiums.
Does it have to be separate property or could it be?
It's likely supposed to be separate property because we want to make sure that it's included in their estate, but that not in the surviving spouse's estate. So
So, well, sorry, but community property state Texas, do you have to like do a separate property doctrine?
you may.
Okay.
That's where the attorneys might
Well,
come
yeah,
into
good
play.
point. Yeah, you talk to your attorney, people.
And I'm not familiar. I'm not an expert in community property.
Good point.
So
Okay, fair enough.
so I'll put that out there.
Yeah, talk to your attorney.
Yes. So how we usually will structure it is just from the insurance perspective is that in this case again the husband would own the policy outright. They would pay premiums on the policy. We would actually name a contingent owner on the policy as that credit shelter trust.
Okay, to be created.
But yes.
Okay.
So at the time of so during lifetime, the husband still has access to cash values, can change the beneficiary, can transfer the policy. They have all the same rights and benefits that any policy owner would have. Now
They
let's
could
say
collaterally sign it potentially, right? The cash values?
potentially.
Yeah, okay.
So they have all the rights that
A normal owner would have, which they could collaterally sign it, I guess.
So what we would then see is that at the death of the husband, the fair market value of that policy, again, this is a second to die policy, so the death benefit isn't payable.
Right.
It's just a fair market value asset that he held in his estate. We would include that in the estate and transfer it to the credit shelter trust by virtue of that contingent owner. Now we have it in a credit shelter trust. The spouse in this case is still a beneficiary of that trust. So she can still access cash values of the policy, but it's held in this credit shelter trust. And then at her death, when the death benefits are actually payable, they're paid into the trust
Right.
outside of her estate. So the death benefit itself is paid tax-free and not includable in her estate. The only estate inclusion that we had was that fair market value at the husband's death. So it's kind of a hedge of maybe for these clients that aren't quite at the estate tax level, maybe including the fair market value doesn't tip them over that edge.
No.
Or maybe they just never got around to doing the irrevocable planning that they thought they might. But we've been able to kind of insulate that death benefit and keep that out of the wife's estate, still payable to the heirs.
Yeah. So what if they die together?
So those are the risks. There's
Yeah.
risks in anything
Okay, so
we do.
that would be the
Yes.
downside. Okay.
So there's always risks in anything we do. So out of order death, let's say that the wife in this case actually died first. The husband now owns a policy. It's
That
still includable in his estate, but he can
right,
still plan for it. He could still gift the policy for at its fair market value to a trust. We'd have a 3-year look back.
right,
Or he could sell the policy to a trust.
right.
So in that case, we'd avoid the 3-year look back for him. So so it doesn't end the planning just because we have an out of order death or something happens, but we do have there are, some of those things that we'd have to account for.
It lends itself to a lot of flexibility though.
It does. And a lot of folks, even in the ultra high net worth space, they want to own it. It's a personal ownership. They want the control. And this is a way to kind of give them that with the flexibility to still do planning down the road should they choose to.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's a very great planning tool, and I think it's I don't really hear it. Well, I hear it talked about occasionally, but not as much as I think you would, because that seems way simpler than a spousal lifetime access trust.
Again, it just depends on the
Depends on the situation. Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. Okay, so we talked a lot about like estate taxes, estate planning, and you brought this up a little bit earlier, but what about like most of the people that we work with and most of the people that most financial professionals, agents work with are not worth 30-40 million dollars. They're maybe worth 10 million. They're still well off. They want to make sure things are taken care of. So what exactly is high net worth, and when should people start doing estate planning?
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to kind of my earlier comments that estate planning should be happening for all clients, no matter
Yeah,
what their net worth
I think so
is.
too.
Uh, it just may look a little bit differently depending on where they're at. So with federal estate tax exemptions likely to remain set at 15 million adjusted, there's going to be fewer clients that'll have an estate tax problem. So there's going to be, like I said, all of those non-tax reasons to do estate planning. We have a lot of families that may have, children or beneficiaries with special needs.
Yeah,
We're looking at, potentially planning for those types of scenarios with specialty trusts and specialty, and adding liquidity there for
right,
ongoing support if other support mechanisms aren't available any longer. There's also, looking at, transfers of businesses, estate equalization. Let's say, if I have 2 children, I do have 2 daughters. One of them wants to get into the business, the other one doesn't. How do you equalize that? How do you kind of manage to those reasons? Additionally, just creditor protection. So even folks that may not have 15, 30, 50 million, they want a legacy for their family. They want to have a legacy for their heirs.
right.
You having trusts and trust planning in place gives a little bit additional creditor protection, not only for, protecting it from future divorce of
I
beneficiaries
was going to bring that up exactly. Yeah,
and those types of situations, but also spendthrift clauses so beneficiaries can't just, blow the money, for lack
yep,
of a better word.
yep,
Making sure that there's some kind of, control in place to make sure that the legacy remains and is managed, and gives them a little bit of, maybe a little bit of, ease in planning, no matter what their net worth level is. Now,
right.
some planning does have costs associated with putting trusts in place and
That's
things
a
like
good
that.
point.
So it's really just meeting where's the client at and what do they want and how can we accomplish that.
Yeah, that's a good point. We actually just had a guy from Wealth Advisors Trust Company, which is a corporate trustee service on, and yeah, he talked a lot about the advantages of that, like having the control after the death and the spendthrift clauses, things like that, and just um, protecting assets. Basically, that's what it comes down to, I suppose. All right, so I had a weird scenario, and I wrote you about this, but this like actually happened. So it was a pretty dramatic thing. So I'll do the easy version, but So client doesn't have an estate tax problem, but they may be worried, okay, what happens after they die to the money, and how do they make sure that, if their spouse gets remarried, their children are protected from inheritance. So how do, I mean, and this seems like the most basic estate planning that almost every what do they call 'em, mass affluent person should be doing. Like from a basic level, you should at least do something like this, right?
Yeah, so it's interesting because this is why my phone is ringing. It's these cases. I talk to an agent. Here's the problem. What can we do? Or I have a client. Here's the situation. How do we manage to this? So in your scenario, it's dad has a new wife, wants to make sure that even that his wife is taken care of, but at the same time, when he passes, you know the kids ultimately receive a majority of their inheritance or his
Right,
legacy for lack
right.
of,
Yeah.
for that. So the original spouses probably have joint assets. They've built this lifestyle together. Everything's there. Probably, it's how do we essentially retain some control after death?
Right.
And that's where trust planning really comes into play. So ensuring that, the assets that he ultimately wants to pass to his heirs can do that by virtue of having a trustee that's managing them, that has and we name the beneficiaries as those heirs that he's intending, and
Right.
that passes outside. That requires some gifting. That require, in this case, they didn't have an estate tax problem, so
No.
he would write it up as a will, or have it pass as a lifetime in a living trust or
Right.
something along those lines. We're not as worried about estate tax problems.
Right.
But let's say that he also purchases a life insurance policy. So potentially, if we have joint assets and he wants the new spouse to be able to remain in the home, or
Which you would think he would, right?
continue to have access to the life that they built together, then
Right.
sure, they've acquired some things. Maybe it's a life insurance policy held in an islet for the benefit of the kids, so that they're still guaranteed this death benefit, this liquidity at his death, that the you know step parent doesn't necessarily have access to, or is not a beneficiary of. The trust beneficiaries could be the kids outright. They could also name the surviving spouse as a lifetime beneficiary, and then upon her death goes to the kids. It just
That could be a good way to do it too.
Exactly. They can give the trustee a variety of powers for distribution on what they, can and can't distribute, percentages, things along those lines. So that's where trusts really come into a big play. Is we have a lot of opportunity in working with individual counsel and, estate planning attorneys. The drafting of it is very important to really get it right. So that's where that individual aspect really comes in.
Yeah, I think you're right. And again, I think that's like low hanging fruit planning for most people. And it really highlights the need for insurance and insurance
Yeah.
products, especially in those scenarios. So I think that's again low hanging fruit because most of our clients, most of our audience's clients are going to be that, mass affluent person. They're not probably not going to have an estate tax problem. So, okay. A lot of information, right?
And we only scratched the surface.
I know, I know. We could talk for quite a while, I believe, but it's a lot of information. But one last thing is what are like the biggest mistakes that not only clients make but their advisors make when talking about like advanced planning, estate planning, or any other type of planning.
Yeah, so I like this question. It's the question I refer to as what's keeping you up at night.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So I think one of the biggest mistakes that's happening, and not to get into technicalities and details, but I think in estate planning specifically, or even in business planning, individual planning, the biggest mistake is just failing to plan. The biggest mistake is really starting the conversation and getting the ball rolling. I know that, it's not a comfortable conversation to have with
No.
people. Or typically when we're talking about estate planning, we're talking about what's going to happen when you die, or when
Yeah.
your loved ones die. That's not comfortable. That's not a conversation a lot of clients are really excited to have.
No.
Similarly with business succession planning, the conversation is what happens when. Those are conversations, and those are ideas and thoughts that are uncomfortable for people. So there
Yeah.
is a hesitancy. I don't think the hesitancy is in the planning itself. It's having the conversation that leads to the planning. But the sooner we're able to start the conversation, the sooner we're able to, to build on that, it drives a better opportunity. So it's
Agreed.
changing the conversation to not necessarily what happens when you're gone, but how can we plan to make while you're here better?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
finding the solution. So when it comes down to it, we can change things. And as you grow, we grow, and the plan grows and shifts. And we're always able to kind of meet the needs, not only of you, but to your family, your heirs, you are always taken care of. And when we just don't, we hopefully don't have to cover the uncomfortable financial conversation then when
Yeah.
we're talking about what happens next.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that's where really the life insurance agent or any financial professional that does life insurance has a unique opportunity to talk to their clients about this stuff because their CPA isn't doing it. Their attorney maybe is doing it, but usually it's the estate attorney and they're going to go visit the estate attorney because someone else told them to go see the estate attorney, right? I mean, that's usually the case. So I think you're exactly right. Is failing to plan, whether it's the buy sell that we talked about earlier. I mean, I don't think I've ever run across a business owner that had a well funded buy sell agreement ever. And I've been doing this a while, and I'm sure many of you out there have never run across a well funded buy sell agreement.
They're out there, but
I'm sure they're out there, but that's because the life insurance agent just walked out the door.
they've been reviewed.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So anyways, Tracey, thank you so much.
Sure.
Thanks for this. I appreciate you coming out. I appreciate your insights. Any other thoughts? Anything else that we missed?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would just go back to of course, we talk a lot about life insurance, and I'm just going to say that if life insurance is going to be a component of the plan, it's really important to get in place soon.
Yes.
The quote that I always say is, we all become uninsurable. We just don't know when.
Could be because you're dead, but
Well, let's hope not. But eventually, because of medical reasons or age,
or otherwise, yeah.
that is, there's going to become a time that life insurance as an opportunity, as an asset, as a solution to some part of the problem, it just isn't going to be available anymore.
It's
So
a
we
really
want to
good
make
point.
sure that it's an opportunity to have that in place to get that put in as a benefit. We don't want to end up in a situation where that could have been a really great benefit, but it's just not on the table anymore.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And it's up to the financial professional to bring that up. Oh, yes. I almost forgot. Tracey, you sent me a piece and we're going to include it in the description as a downloadable, but the client navigator, you sent me that. I think that was a fantastic piece and I wanted to include that. Really, it's a good way to kind of see the planning opportunities for your clients, right? So John Hancock's got some really good pieces. Feel free to download that. We'll put a link in the description. So thanks again.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody.
Fun.
Yep.